Welcome to a Wednesday edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm John Gonzalez alongside our NBA insider, Bill Ryder. No Ash today, Bill. Both of us were just talking about our summer. We're well into summer league now. You had summer league duties last night.
Summer
How'd
league
that go?
time. It was thrilling. I mean, I'm not sure I've ever seen more riveting basketball. Yeah, I was just telling you, watching Stephon Castle play, trying to pretend that what I saw will actually translate in a few years to he and Wemby pairing for some sort of a magical championship run. I guess that was borderline cool. He played well, and I kind of squinted my eyes and pretended that it meant that Wemby's got a partner in crime. Now we'll see if that actually turns out to be true.
Back in the early process years when the off season was really the real season for the Sixers, I loved summer league. I completely geeked out on it. And then I had taken some time off from it and then got back into it because of work this week. And I was like, oh, right. A lot of these kids are real bad, but we'll see how that goes as it continues. We also have some Team USA stuff that we're going to get into later in the show. We're going to go through our tiers for the Eastern and Western conferences. That should be fun. Bill, I think I have 15 teams in the Western Conference making the playoffs. We'll discuss that coming up. But first, we got to discuss. Everybody's in. Kawhi Leonard, we had news right before the show started. Kawhi Leonard is withdrawing from Team USA, citing chronic knee soreness. Multiple reports have Derrick White as the replacement. We'll talk about that in a second, but just your initial reaction on Kawhi Leonard, who just cannot stay healthy. The 2019 version, Bill, when we saw him win a championship on the Warriors floor with the Raptors, that feels like a zillion years ago.
Zillion years ago, almost a different player. I remember, John, I'm sure you did too, talking about how that guy, because we knew he was going to leave and he went to the Clippers, might force his way into the top 10 or 12 all time player list. He might become the only player to be a three-time finals MVP with three different teams. Obviously, he didn't do that. Eventually, LeBron James got there in LA. And since then, it's been every season he has played fewer than 60 games for the Clippers, other than this past season, but couldn't make it through the playoffs. So my initial reaction is exactly your initial reaction. It feels like that was a different guy, a different universe, a different time. And I probably shouldn't make some overarching statement, but it seems like it's long past time for me to give up the ghost on the idea Kawhi Leonard's going to be that player he was in 2019 ever again, and just accept what the Clippers weren't able to and what's going to hamper them, and just love the guy that he was and realize that person is not coming back. Not if you can't get through a few weeks of the Olympics when that was something you'd committed to.
Just not available for the postseason, not available now for Team USA. I think PG might have dodged a bullet here because we talked about this on Monday's
Big
show
time.
where he said that he was trying to come back, and if they had just given him that no trade clause, he'd still be a Clipper. Now it's just James Harden's problem, and PG is in a much better situation in Philadelphia because they only won, and it almost defies belief. If you had told me this when they decided to team up and go to LA, I wouldn't have believed it. But in 5 years, they won 3 playoff series. How is that possible?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The Paul George thing is such a great insight because when I got around to thinking about PG, I envisioned that Will Ferrell Wedding Crashers, moment where he's just I can't do it, but he's just celebrating the
It's pretty
universe.
close.
You're right, Paul George and James Harden and those collected pieces with the Clippers are what they've always been, right? They're a pretty good team where Kawhi's not going to be around, and they tease about being more in the playoffs, and then they're not. Well, I know we'll get into what we think Philly's going to be later, but it certainly has more ceiling than whatever's going on with the Clippers. I'm with you, Paul George. I know you don't want to give winning sort of winners out in these situations where someone's hurt, but Paul George, the biggest winner of this breaking news.
Yeah, for sure. So we find out that Kawhi is out, and now almost immediately there were reports that Derrick White is in. Before we get to some other people who could have been the replacement, how do we feel about Derrick White being the guy who gets the nod?
Other than all the folks, and Ash, I'm sorry wherever you are, if I'm putting on this list who don't like the Celtics, and it's another Celtic, I think it makes tons of sense, right? And I think this is sort of what we've talked about with some of the other guys, including Drew Holiday, a guy out there who's going to play defense, who's going to do the nitty gritty. I actually, John, think it's academic. As good as international basketball has become, I don't think it. I think they could have added you, or even worse, me, to
Yes.
the roster, and USA is still going to win this thing. So it's an academic exercise. But I like that instead of adding just the biggest star, the biggest name, they actually found a guy who fits what they're going to need, play some defense, perimeter defense, obviously a winner. He just showcased his toughness. I like it very, very much, even though there's going to be a lot of angry fans who don't want a Celtic out there and a lot of very worthy other American players who obviously weren't the guy.
I totally agree with you that it doesn't matter who the replacement is. I was going to make a joke and say they could have added Cooper Flag. It didn't, it could have been literally anybody in the NBA, and this thing's already baked. It would be a shocker if they didn't win it. It would be one of the biggest disappointments in Team USA history if they didn't win it. I'd be shocked if they even lose a game in this thing. But yes, Derrick White is a very good basketball player, made all defense. I have no problem with this whatsoever, but we should mention some other names that were kind of bandied about how come they didn't get a little bit of like a consideration for this. Jalen Brunson, obviously, Ashley wanted, not surprisingly, for him to be the guy, although he's so ball dominant that I don't know that they necessarily need that skill set. Whereas Derrick White is just an awesome defender and will do the little things and like just will play whatever role you want. PG's another guy that they threw out there. Here's somebody who was a little confused that it was a Celtic, but not a certain Celtic. So right after the news was announced that Derrick White was the guy, Jaylen Brown tweeted out the little emojis with the monocle who's trying to figure out what's happening here. You see that right there on screen. I think maybe Jaylen Brown thinks it should have been Jaylen Brown, Bill.
Yeah, which, by the way, what is it that Pat Riley called it? The disease of more? The more that you have success, the more everybody wants their piece of the shine, their piece of the money, and their piece of the credit. Jaylen Brown's got a point, but again, and by the way, he obviously is a very good defender and just an all-around great player. But for the reason you just outlined, I'm 100% okay with it. The problem is if you go with Jaylen Brown, if you get into a star rather than a role player who'll do whatever you need, I think you start to have a really strong argument for Brunson. And I think you're right about Brunson. Like in a vacuum, he's charismatic. He's really easy to root for. He's a great team guy. It would be cool to see that particular guy and everything he's done and proven about himself and really the Knicks on that team. But they don't need him. This is, you put White on there, he goes in, he does whatever role you need. If he plays no minutes, he doesn't care. If he has to play minutes for whatever matchups and reasons, he'll do a great job. But I think you're right. The Brown thing, the fact that they're teammates, like, I get it, man, but you're all going to have different things that are going to come your way as if you build a dynasty. You might want to just, in my opinion, respectfully, pull back a little bit on what appears to be a little bit of criticism at your guy. If there's another guy, I get it, that's your guy, you might just keep it to yourself.
Some other Team USA business that we should just mention here. They have their first warm-up tonight in Vegas against Canada. That should be a fun one. But KD, Bill, hasn't practiced yet. He has a calf strain. They say it's going to be fine. He says it's going to be fine. We already mentioned that this team is really loaded and it won't matter if KD doesn't play. However, should there be any level of concern here for KD, either in this tournament, in the Olympics, or even moving forward?
You and I we're like, get out of my brain, John, because my concern isn't about the U.S. men's national team winning gold. My concern was about the Suns. I'm like, oh man, like, because again, like if Kevin Durant has a history and he's at an age where being hurt is probably, or at least having to deal with injuries is more likely than just playing 79 games and being able to be out there consistently. And so it does not matter to the USA. And by the way, they'll just plug in another player. Whoever, there's a whole roster of guys, Jaylen Brown included, who would like to go and play and hoop and be a great addition and not even have to start and the team be fine. My takeaway was, it's not Kawhi Leonard, but it's sort of a shadow of that reaction. Oh man, I really hope KD is going to be healthy next year, because while USA doesn't need him, the Suns need every ounce of his greatness to just, I think, fight for mediocrity, but certainly be okay.
Yeah, which is a good point, because we're going to get into our tiers next. But if they do take KD off of this team, Bill, I hope they do add Jaylen Brown. I can't believe I'm advocating for yet another Celtic, but I want it to happen just because Ashley will lose her mind, and I have to see this happen. So here's rooting for Jaylen Brown. That would be amazing. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then on the other side, we're going to go through our conference tiers in the East and the West. We're going to start with our contenders. That's going to be on the other side, coming up on Beyond the Arc, right here on CBS Sports Network. All right. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John and Bill here on a Wednesday. All right, so we decided we're going to go through, it is the summer, and it might be slightly early, but coming off of free agency, we couldn't help ourselves. We're going to go and put all the teams into tiers. We're going to start with contenders. How do you want to do this, Bill? Do you want to go by conference, or what do you want to do with contenders?
I mean, I could do the whole smorgasbord if you want, or whatever. Because it's never too early for me to start ranking teams a year, a little less than a year from someone being crowned a champion. Like,
All right,
let's
give
get
me
into it. You tell
give me
me.
your
What do you
yeah.
feel?
We're a year away. You start. Give me your contenders in the East, I guess.
All right. So I went back and forth, and then I limited it to one true contender. I'm going to put down for me as a contender the Boston Celtics, and the standard for me, John, is my absolute belief that they can win an NBA championship. That health allowing, certainly matchups performance, but that I am convinced, and they don't have to show me anything else, that they're good enough to win an NBA champion. So win an NBA championship as currently constructed. Boston's my only absolute locked-in contender in the Eastern Conference so far.
I think that that's the smarter way to do it. I was thinking about it more in terms of contenders in the conference, but then we started talking about, well, if they're contenders in the conference, doesn't that also necessarily make them contenders to win the whole thing? At which point I would go with you. If it's just about winning the whole thing, I have a hard time believing that the Knicks and the Sixers are going to do that. But I did have the Knicks and the Sixers lumped in with the Celtics as contenders in the Eastern Conference, just because I think there's a pretty sizable gap between those three teams and the rest of that
Yes.
conference. I am really interested to see how close the Knicks and the Sixers can be to at least like making the Celtics work. Because what did they win the East by? Was it 11 games, something like that this past season? It was a double-digit lead. It was absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, and I can't imagine that the Celtics will blow the doors off of the conference by that kind of margin again. But how much can the Knicks and the Sixers close the gap is really interesting to me.
Dude, we're having a similar line of thought. I put New York, I put the Knicks, and I put the Sixers on knocking on the door, which is our next category down. Because, and boy, Ash, I love Ash, but I feel like sorry, Ash, taking shots at your team. I am worried about Tibbs' ability to run guys down. And I know that this is a really deep team, especially with the addition of Bridges. But, John, I don't think it's unreasonable to at least wonder and worry about whether or not Tibbs is able to properly manage those minutes and use that depth properly. So I know the team and the roster is there, but they did have injury issues. I'm curious how Julius Randle fits when he's back, when they're actually making a run and they're a contender. So that's why it's a question mark for me. I think Philly might even have more ceiling, and we've gotten a picture of the team. But I was talking to a GM the other day who made it look, he's a hater because he's not the Sixers GM. It wasn't Daryl Morey. But I was sort of singing the praises of Daryl Morey, and he pushed back like, well, we've seen superstars just not work. We've seen that again and again. Let's just make sure Paul George actually fits with Maxine Embiid and that. So, okay, like I will concede that, I guess, a little bit if that person is watching. So I've got them right on the outside looking in, but a lot of that may change for me by January. Whatever we see, maybe for me, those two teams or one of them jump up.
Yeah, the Daryl Morey part is interesting because he did kind of luck into PG and the Clippers just like doing whatever the hell the Clippers did. And they lucked into Caleb Martin, who evidently took considerably less money, I guess, like kind of accidentally, that the Heat wanted to give him, and then all of a sudden looked around and went, okay, well, I guess I'll go to the Sixers now. So I really like their roster, but I wonder how much of it was Daryl pulling the right strings and then just like the stars really aligning for them. And yes, about your Knicks point, I wonder how much of this team is Tibbs proof, right? Because with any other coach, I'd look at this team and go, man, they're so deep. It's unbelievable. Like there's so much redundancy here. And like Mikal Bridges is such a great hedge against OG Anunoby because Mikal Bridges is always available. OG only intermittently available. And then now Josh Hart goes to the bench and Dante DiVincenzo is there. And like, you've got these like microwave players who can come in and give you significant minutes if you use them. And like, if Nick Nurse was the coach of that team, I'd be yes, I'd be all about it. But now Tibbs, somebody's going to have to go and shake him and be like, can you put these guys in, please? OG is very tired. So we'll see what happens there. What do you got in the Western Conference?
It feels, because it feels so unfair, doesn't it, just on the Tibbs thing? Because he's the guy that sort of, as the chef, crafted these ingredients he has into a real contender. I'm sure that's part of the reason Bridges wants to be there and Anunoby stuck around. But I'm with you. When Anunoby's playing 41 minutes on the fifth game in October, we're going west now.
Okay, so contenders for the West as well, yeah.
Okay, so I was having trouble with Dallas. Weirdly, I didn't want to put them on there. I wanted to have them knocking on the door, but I just checked myself because you just made an NBA Finals, so you're obviously a contender. And you added Klay
Yeah.
Thompson, and we'll see if that works. So they're on there, of course. Oklahoma City, if I was power ranking, I go OKC, I'd go Denver, and I would go Dallas. I left Minnesota off, and we can get into why when we get to the next category, but those are my three.
I saw that you left Minnesota off. I did not. I think there's a pretty clear in the same way that there's a pretty clear 3 in the Eastern Conference. For me, there's a pretty clear 4 in the Western Conference, and then a significant gap. So I'll put the Thunder first. Wolves, Nuggets. The Nuggets take a little step back because of KCP, but I still think their top line talent is so incredibly good. Although I would, if I'm a Nuggets fan, now start being a little bit nervous about the fact that Jamal Murray still hasn't signed that extension. About to play for Team Canada, and it's like,
Yeah.
look, I don't know if he's trying to make all NBA this year, even though he's never even made an all-star team in order to get like a bigger bump on his next contract, but that would make me a little nervous. I do have the Mavs in there too. Like you, I struggled with this a little bit. The reason why I have them there is exactly why you have them there. They just made the finals. So by definition, they should be in the contender tier, right? But I don't like them as much as the Thunder and the Wolves, and I don't like them as much as the Nuggets going forward. We'll see. I mean, they proved us wrong before, so maybe they will again.
You know what it feels, John? You know what it feels like? I'm not a huge golf guy, but if you win a major, you get an exemption for a lifetime or so. They get a contender's exemption. Do I really think that they're going to earn it next year? I sort of don't because of how hard the West is and the run that they made and sort of the unique realities. So yeah, I'm with you. It doesn't feel right, but they get it's an exempt. It's like a golf level. You made the finals. This is your consolation prize. You're on this really important list that John and Bill put together.
I'm sure that matters to them almost as much as them making the NBA Finals this past season. And on paper too, I do like them better than what they had coming out of the finals because I like Klay on the whole more than I like Derrick Jones Jr. Derrick Jones Jr. obviously a much better defender, but I think overall Klay Thompson, even though he has lost a little bit of a step, way better offensively. So, that should give them a little bit of a boost because you can't rely on PJ Washington to go supernova from 3 in a really critical series and then do it again and again and again. He only did it the one time against Oklahoma City. And then all of a sudden they're like, man, we could really use some scoring right now.
Expired.
But yeah. I don't like them as much, but perhaps they'll prove us wrong again. All right. Then the knocking on the door tier is our next tier, Bill. And that's where you put the Knicks and the Sixers, right?
Yeah. So again, like for the reason we discussed, I think one or both of these teams are going to earn. Again, they're going to be very concerned about my thinking on this. So, guys, I'm sorry, I know the organizations are watching. Don't worry, New York and Philly. It's going to be okay. You can earn your way to this list. I have some questions, and they're the questions that we talked about. And then the West, as we discussed, I have Minnesota. And again, I probably would have had Minnesota and Dallas. For me, I think that there's a bit of a drop off, but Dallas got that exemption. Maybe I'm not giving the Timberwolves enough credit. What a run that they made. But I've always been a little skeptical of Cat and what he can be as the number 2 guy. And I'm still a little worried about whether or not Anthony Edwards is going to – I think he will, but I'm not 100% convinced that he's going to grow into a top 5 player. Not only that, a guy that is good enough single-handedly to get you to an NBA championship if you have the right pieces around him. There's probably 4 or 5 guys in the game that can do that. And if he grows into that thing, if he, as he said the other day, is the most important player on the face of the earth, which is what you're saying, if you think of the number 1 option on the U.S. men's national team, if that's real, then the Timberwolves are real. I don't believe in them as much just yet as Oklahoma City and Denver, but it's close. And again, they can earn it for me.
You know what an early adopter I was of the Timberwolves and how much I love them.
I know.
Bill, he said it. And Edwards said that he's the best player on Team USA. Therefore, ergo, they must be in the contender tier. And also that defense is really good. And I'm excited to see whether or not they can get some offense from Rob Dillingham right away, or if it's going to take him a little bit of time to develop how many minutes he's going to get. But if he's anything like advertised offensively, having that transition from Mike Conley from old to young, being able to like shift some of that responsibility to somebody who could be a nice running mate alongside Ant Edwards, makes me optimistic about the Timberwolves. We're going to take a break, and then on the other side, I'll give my knocking on the door tier, and we'll go through that because there's a team in the Eastern Conference that I think is kind of flying under the radar, and they graduated to this tier for me. So we'll talk about that on the other side. This is Beyond the Arc right here on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John and Bill here. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network. Check out our YouTube page at Beyond the Arc CBS. Please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment. All right, so Bill gave his knocking on the door teams, those teams that are just below the contender tier. I'm going to start in the East, Bill. The Orlando Magic. I think if we're going to pick a team that isn't Boston and Philly and the Knicks, you can have the Bucks for me. You can have the Cleveland Cavaliers, despite the fact that they brought back Donovan Mitchell. The Pacers had a really nice season last year. They're playing with house money. I like them just fine. The Magic, to me, are the ascendant team in the Eastern Conference that could make some noise. They go and get KCP. I love that fit for them. They needed shooting. He's a very reliable three-point shooter. Also does all the dirty work, isn't going to demand the ball. Fits in, I think, pretty seamlessly, or should anyway, alongside Paolo Banchero. And then they just extend Franz Wagner, who probably got overpaid, but it's a bet on the future. And then Jalen Suggs ending up being an all defensive player. That defense is unbelievable. Jonathan Isaac being a guy who can guard pretty much anybody. Now his availability has been a problem, but I really like that team. If they can find just a little bit more offense in the next couple of years, kind of feels like an OKC starter kit to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% with you. You're probably a little more optimistic on them this upcoming year, but the thing about young players and young stars is that they make leaps. They make leaps sometimes from year to year, and if they can find a little bit of a leap offensively, that becomes, you're right, maybe not an elite team, but a knocking on the door of elite, because the defense is extraordinary. I'm with you on all the things you said. The addition of KCP is great. And they have the added advantage of they don't, unlike Oklahoma City, who are amazing, or Houston, who's pretty good, they don't play in the Western Conference. And so there is a path in the East to certainly being a top 5 or 6 team if things go really well, and they were this past year, or maybe a little bit higher if the wheels come off for one of the big dogs that we think are really good. And then you start to have a momentum, get good matchups, anything can happen.
Yeah, I mean, the problem for them, maybe not an OKC starter kit, more like a Timberwolves starter kit, because they're also similarly really awesome defensively, but then offensively challenged. And, you're going to need Franz Wagner shot sub 30% from 3 last year. It was a step back. So they're going to need him to find that shot again and really correct it. KCP will help on that front, but I still think you need guard play. And I love Jalen Suggs defensively, but he is not exactly an offensive juggernaut. So in the next couple of seasons, they need to identify, where's the offense coming from? Because, defensively, if you're looking at, I
would say Banchero's probably not going to have the star turn that Anthony Edwards has. I mean, we're talking about Anthony Edwards maybe being the face of the league or a top 5 player, a guy that can just take over. We saw this over the course. I'm not sure Orlando has that. So maybe that's some of my hesitation. They've got really great players and a couple guys that can be stars, but I'm not sure that I see a player on that roster who I think is going to be a top 5 player in their career.
Do you think Banchero could be a Tatum or Brown?
Yes, it's a really good comp. So but the thing is, do you think Wagner is whatever, Tatum to Brown or Brown to Tatum? I
not
don't.
As much.
They're missing a piece. They're really good, but they're missing. Yeah. If you're going to go the Celtics model, which is a hard model, it's only worked once, or not once, a few times. I think I mean, they're really good, but they're missing a star, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why the contract, if we're just going merit based on what Franz Wagner is worth, I wouldn't have maxed him, but homegrown guy, hard to get these guys. We were talking about this in the break about the new CBA and how drafting and hitting on your draft picks is absolutely paramount. And then you have to hold on to those guys. Yeah. So you basically, Orlando was we have to max him. What are we going to do? We can't lose him. All right. So I love the Magic. We'll see how they develop. Western Conference, I've got 2 teams. See what you think about this. The Pelicans, I really like that they added DeJounte Murray. And then the Grizzlies, they had a gap year last year. John Morant was down. The entire team was injured. We forget about how good they were 2 years ago. I've got them right on that tier below the top 4 in the Western Conference that I think you probably slot them into that 5-6. Maybe not the Pelicans as much, but I really think it's going to be a big bounce back year for the Grizzlies, especially I was talking about this with Tommy Tran on HQ the other day. Prior to the draft bill, I was out on Zach Edey. I was like, this kid can't play in the NBA.
I
He's
knew
too
you were going
slow.
to
He'll never
Edie.
be able to get up. And now, rookie of the year, Bill. I watched one summer league game and I'm
One
in.
game. You should, of every person on earth, John Gonzalez, you should know the best because of your Sixers time of celebrating and embracing Summer League and then realizing, I'm with you though, because I'm not a big Edie guy. But I'll say this in Edie's defense. He does look like he belongs physically. We talked about this the other day with maybe a little bit the opposite with Ronnie. I mean, it's those guys aren't very, he's not playing against good play. I mean, I'm with you. He looks amazing. That's so funny. I had the
What do
same
you
overreaction.
think?
I was like, oh, Edie.
Joe Musso and I were on that night after the overtime game. The overtime for Summer League is an abomination. That's a topic for another time. But we were both kind of like, well, I mean, he isn't getting lost defensively. He's clogging the lane. You know he's going to be able to protect the rim and rebound as long as he's not like super dragging down the offense when they try to get out and transition off a miss, which he might. But I guess you're just running a 4-man break at that point.
Yep,
he could be useful.
I mean, I have a rule that I read. You can't. I remember a year ago sitting in Vegas and people freaking out around me about Wembanyama after 14 minutes of summer league play, but he looks good. But I'm with you on the general point that Edie's not necessarily 80% of the reason I agree with you on Memphis, but I agree with you on Memphis. Like we sort of have short-term memories, and it's hard. It's easy to forget that 2 years ago Memphis was a contender, and all the John Morant drama, and then the injury, it felt like to everybody else on that team. I almost put them on the knocking on the door, and I didn't, but I would put them a little bit ahead of the Pelicans, but I also love the move that the Pelicans made. So those are both really interesting teams in terms of if you're looking for a surprise, and we had some this past year, they could both qualify. I like where you placed them.
I want to see how many minutes they can squeeze out of Edey because that's going to be critical. I mean, I'm mostly joking here. I have more expectations for him after watching him play than I did previously because I had no expectations for him. But they are desperate for a center alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. But independent of what they can squeeze out of Edey minutes wise, if they could get 25 minutes a game, that would be huge for them. I just think the top line talent of John Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are really, really good. And like to see Ja have a full season where he's not suspended and also healthy, he's just so dynamic. He's also one of my favorite players to watch, Bill. I mean, like I remember watching him in Summer League and being blown away and being like, okay, this kid's a player. And that actually did translate. So I'm excited to see those guys come back. Okay. So we're going to take another break. And then on the other side, this is where it starts to get a little murky, right? We've established the teams that we like, that we think are going to be good next year. And now we're going to get into that middle of the pack. We're going to call them solid playoff teams, but we'll debate whether or not that's actually true. On the other side, you are watching Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network. You can also find us in podcast form. Please download, subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff. All right, Bill, we got solid playoff teams here. These are the teams that we anticipate will be pretty safely in there, but probably won't make much noise. Who do you got either conference?
All right, before we get to your 14 teams in the Western Conference in this particular category, let me look down. All right, so I had the Pelicans and the Grizz. You just had a category above, but it could have gone either way for me. I've got the Warriors on this list, and I was trying to decide if I'm being a little overly nostalgic, if I'm getting carried away, but I actually like the additions that they made, and I think maybe a little bit of a reset post-Clay and just making some changes. I'm in on the Warriors having a chance to be a non-play-in team. And then I've got the Pacers, which I feel like maybe I didn't give them enough respect. I wonder if none of us did, but I got the Pacers here, the Magic here in the Eastern Conference. I've got Cleveland, and the team that you and I both have here, I think seems disrespectful but is accurate, is the Milwaukee Bucks. I know they have Giannis. I know their odds are really, really good in the Eastern Conference. I understand the argument that they're going to have a full Doc Rivers camp. What does a full Doc Rivers camp mean? It means he gets to go golfing a bunch and then come into camp. I mean, give me a break. But that's the argument that people are making to try to get these guys on the same page. My skepticism remains. I don't think they're going to have enough offense. You know that I'm not a big Doc guy, so I think that's the big headline for me. But though that they're in this category, but those are my solid playoff teams. And the fact we have Milwaukee here, John, I think is correct, but I think it's a little eyebrow raising.
Man, the conversation around the Bucks got real quiet real fast, didn't it? Last year, this time,
Yeah.
or I forget exactly when Dame got traded, but in the offseason last year, everybody was like, oh man, Dame and Giannis together, it's going to be amazing. And aren't they like 1-1A with the Celtics? And they're really going to challenge for the Eastern Conference. And now nobody is talking about these guys except in the context that you just did, Bill, where you look at them and go, okay, sure. Yeah. Another full season of Doc, I guess. Like, are they going to figure out the pick and roll between Dame and Giannis? Is Giannis going to be healthy? Is Dame going to be healthy? How much more can you squeeze out of Chris Middleton? Like, yeah, I'm not at all bullish on the Bucks. I think for me, I have the same grouping as you, except for I have the Heat in here as well, just because I think like the top 8 in the Eastern Conference is pretty well established. Like, you know, I don't expect much out of the Bulls and the Hawks and the Raptors and the Wizards that we'll get to, like the lesser teams. I think those 8 are just going to be in there, but those four that you mentioned, like the Cavs, the Bucks, the Pacers, and the Heat, I'm not really excited about any of them. If I had to pick one, I guess I'd go Cavs or Pacers to maybe surprise a little bit, but they're just kind of middle of the pack teams. There's nothing super exciting about any of them.
I think the one argument I make for the Pacers, and I obviously didn't make to put them higher, but Halliburton was so sensational at the start of last regular season. I know nobody cares about the play-in tournament, but whatever. There was a focus and a spotlight, and they went to Vegas and they lost to the Lakers in that championship game. If Halliburton can reclaim that form and they can play at the level they played in that playoff run, right? Because he wasn't at that level even in that run to the conference finals. I don't know, like, but so I didn't put him that high. But if any team is going to surprise John of the group you just mentioned, I think for me it would be the Pacers.
Yeah, the Pacers is a good pick, and I want to see what else the Cavs do if they're going to just stick with this current roster. Kenny Atkinson, previously I had advocated for getting rid of one of the bigs, and I had said, hey, wouldn't Jared Allen to New Orleans in exchange for Brandon Ingram make sense for both sides? But now that Kenny is reunited with his guy Jared Allen, I'd be surprised if Jared Allen's on the move. But I do think they need to, shake up that roster a little bit or at least shake up the way they play. Because quite clearly, like that whole Garland alongside Donovan Mitchell experiment wasn't working. So maybe they stagger the guards and stagger the bigs. That'll be on Kenny to figure out. Let's do the Western Conference because, as you know, you go first because I have the entirety of the Western Conference in this tier now.
Yeah, so for me, for solid playoff teams, it's Pelicans, Grizzlies, and that's it. Like I made it. You and I went very different approaches. My solid playoff teams are your knocking on the doors. And your solid playoff teams in the West, I believe, is every team that has played currently or has ever thought of playing in the Western Conference.
So I had the Grizzlies and the Pelicans in a tier ahead. They honestly could be in this tier. I should have probably just put them in this tier. Let's do that. Retroactively, I'm dropping them down into this tier because I think I had mentioned this to you and Ashley the other day, where after the first 4, I don't know what to make of the rest of the Western Conference. I think the first 4 in the Western Conference is really solid and light years ahead of everybody else. And then you have the Grizzlies and the Pelicans, along with the Kings who just got DeMar DeRozan, the Lakers who have 2 All-NBA players, the Suns who have, KD and Booker and what's left of Bradley Beal. The Clippers no longer have PG. I think that they're the team that's going to have the biggest step back, especially because who knows what you're going to get out of Kawhi Leonard and how much of it. And then also the Warriors. Bill, I counted, you can have 10 teams, including the play-in. I have 11.
I mean, okay. So, and you'll see I have a lot of these. My Clippers were moving. Like I was going to have Clippers high, and then the Kawhi Leonard news came out. It's like, how, that he's going to miss the Olympics, and therefore, how do you really rely on him next year? For me, the Clippers, I don't believe in at all. So they're a playing team. The Lakers, I hear what you're saying, but they've ever been since the play-in began as a play-in team, other than 2020, and they were legitimately great even before the season got suspended and they won the bubble. They were the top of the Western Conference, if memory serves, John, when things got shut down. And the Suns are. I mean, how can you have the Suns be a playoff? I think they're a disaster. And the KD thing. So I've got those teams in particular slotted for my play-in, but I'm with you. The margins are small. And the Suns surprise and Kevin Durant's super healthy and Bradley Beal, I don't know, becomes somewhat of a semblance of a basketball player again, maybe there's a move up from a play-in team. Maybe the Lakers figure it out, but I don't believe in any of those teams. I just don't.
We have other tiers below that are playing or bust and then tanking teams, right? We haven't even gotten to the
Yeah.
Rockets yet. I'm going to put them aside for a second. The reason why this was so difficult for me is all of these teams that I just rattled off between the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, the Kings, the Lakers, the Suns, the Clippers, and the Warriors on paper should be playoff teams. But there's not enough room, including the play-in, when you expand it out to 10 teams.
Right.
One of those teams that I just mentioned, Bill, is not even going to make the play-in. And then on top of that, the Rockets are looming. And I don't know which one
and you haven't mentioned the Spurs.
Push to the side. The Spurs as well.
The Spurs 38 games this year, or 40, but be kind of a tough. I don't think they're going to be a play-in team, but I don't think so either. Good.
The Bills, the Spurs, you're the Bills. The Spurs could be infinitely better this upcoming season. I was thinking about this. Could be super plucky. Nobody's going to want to play them. Chris Paul, I know that he's not your guy, but him and Harrison Barnes just like putting a professional face on the operation. Just making the team. Chris Paul does win in the regular season. He makes other teams. Wherever he's gone, he makes them better. Yeah.
Yep.
They could end up being in that 35 to 40 win range and then being still light years away from the playoffs. And like I said, one of these teams, and I don't know which one it is, which is why I ended up with 11. One of these teams isn't going to make it. And we're going to go, man, they won 40 something games, 45 games, and still didn't make the postseason, didn't even make the play-in. That's just bananas to me. It's crazy. All right. So we're going to take another break. Last break.
Are we doing other side? Sorry. Got it. Ready.
All right. Other break. And then on the other side, we'll talk about the other teams that we didn't list yet. The Western Conference is so loaded. We're going to continue that conversation after a quick break. This is Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network. All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc. Just wrapping up our tiers here. Now we get into, this becomes a little bit more complicated, Bill. The play-in or bust. I looked at this more as an aspirational thing, at least in the Western Conference. In the East, it was just kind of like the dregs that were left over that won't be completely tanking. But take us through your East and West play-in or bust here.
So in the West, my play-in or bust teams, I think, could bust. I think all of these teams can miss the play-in, as crazy as that sounds. I've got the Lakers here. I wouldn't be shocked if the Suns missed the play-in. I've got the Suns here. I did put the Kings here. Don't love the DeRozan thing. That could be wrong. Like maybe that offense at the end of games with De'Aaron Fox and two clutch players works. I don't love it. I have your Rockets here. I love the Rockets. I just feel like maybe they made a huge jump last year and it's not sustainable. And in the West, I've got the Spurs here. Now, just bear with me. Chris Paul's a ceiling raiser. You already talked about it. He wins in the regular season. All of a sudden, Wemby makes some ridiculous historical leap, which I think is certainly within the realm of possibility. Castle turns out to be a really nice piece and is able to contribute. And they get into like a little 40, 42 game sort of win projection land where they're playing for the play-in. Maybe they're not quite there in February or March, but it's all gravy. They don't have to get there. It doesn't matter. It's all extra, and so the pressure's off, and one of these other teams crumble in the face of it. And I've got on the other side, I put the Heat as my Eastern Conference play-in team. I'm not convinced that things are going to be great there, especially with the weird Jimmy Butler. I'm not, I'm going to see this thing through and see what happens. I love Spoelstra. I believe in the culture. I just don't think they're very good this upcoming season.
I like your points about the Spurs. I had them in the tanking for Cooper Flag, but you're right that CP and Harrison Barnes and another year of Wemby could really raise their level. I just wonder if they're trying to win now, if they don't care and it's just going to happen through osmosis, because one more year and then like getting another big draft pick in a draft class that is supposedly considerably better next year. But it wouldn't surprise me if the Spurs level up in a way quicker than we may necessarily anticipated. For me in the West, I just had the Rockets here. And this is what I was talking about it being more aspirational. The Rockets pushed the Warriors last season and almost made the play-in before the Warriors finally pulled away. They are young. They are deep. They are fun. I don't think it's going to happen, but if they did make it into the play-in, that would be a massive win for them because, they're one of those teams along with the Spurs where 2-3 years from now, we're going to be looking at them as solid playoff teams, and then maybe knocking on the door a team that can really step forward. And like, as some of these other teams in the West, Bill, start to age out, right? Because LeBron is amazing, but he's not going to be LeBron forever. Eventually, he's going to have to hang it up. And the Suns, I don't think, are long for this world. They're going to have to blow that thing up. You already mentioned the Kings. Like, all of a sudden, some of these teams that are clogging up the works in the Western Conference, the Rockets are going to insert themselves into that conversation, I think. And then in the Eastern Conference, I didn't even really buy. This is more Bulls, Hawks, and Raptors, Bill. I have them there just because they're going to be bad. I don't know that they're going to be bad. Somebody's going to have to be in the play-in. I think two of those teams will end up in there just because they won't be bad enough.
I put Atlanta and the Raptors under Yuck, even though in the East, Yuck is also a play-in team. Because in the West, we have a Yuck category. The Yuck teams in the West aren't making the play. But in the East, you can be just and it can work. Can I circle back to something you said about the Rockets? Because it's a great. Here's one other like small, not the only factor, but one maybe a little bit of pressure on the scale for Houston and for San Antonio. I just think that they have a huge advantage in coaching. I think they have a huge advantage in coaching, just the way that we think of it, but also in developing young players. Like both Ime Udoka and Pop are really good at that and good at sort of utilizing young guys and teaching them while still trying to win. And so I think I don't know, what are Udoka and Pop worth? 2 or 3 wins more than you should get with a young team. And maybe that's enough, right? To sort of push you a little bit over some other teams that are more talented on paper.
Yeah, I love what they're building in Houston. I really do. It'll be interesting to see too when it comes contract time, whether or not they're going to commit themselves to Jalen Green, or maybe they unplug Jalen Green, or maybe Alperen Şengün and try to get a big superstar. Of these teams that we have in the Yuck / tanking for Cooper flag category, which includes the Nets and the Hornets and the Pistons and the Wizards and the Jazz and all the bad teams. Which team are you maybe
so bad?
Is there any optimism for any of these teams for you?
I'm looking at my list. I'm staring. No. Maybe Utah, because Danny Ainge is going to figure it out. But that's more down the line. Maybe Utah.
I would say Utah because they have Danny Ainge. I would say the Nets because they now have all of the Knicks picks in perpetuity. And they have some time to rebuild this thing. I would love to say the Pistons because I do believe in Trajan Langdon, and they just re-signed Cade Cunningham to a max contract. But I don't look at that as an optimistic situation. I don't see a way back for them.
I don't either. I mean, he has inherited such a mess, and there's only so many of those jobs, and I understand it. But it's a rebuild that it was already a rebuild.
Yeah, rebuild on rebuild. All right, so those are our Yuck teams, and that's going to do it for us today. But Bill is going to be back at it on Friday, I believe, with Ashley Nicole Moss, and you can explain to her why you didn't have the Knicks in the contender tier. She's not going to be happy with you, but they'll have that show on Friday. I'm going to be off. I'll be back next week. But for now, thank you so much for watching. He's Bill Ryder. I'm John Gonzalez. Back at it on Friday, gang.